Hi, in today's video, we're going to be addressing the text type of a book review. This book review is based on Jason Ardy's memoir. The guiding question here is, how and to what effect does the writer construct a critical perspective on the autobiography? So as an autobiography, the expectation of the reader is to get to know more about the life of the writer. Look at the title of this review. It says, Jason Ardy's memoir is mawkish, self-aggrandizing, and hard to believe. We are looking at rule of thirds right away. The embattled former Cambridge professor's autobiography, Great and Unfortunate Things, feels precision-tooled to flatter the biases of the sappiest white liberals. Now let's look at the use of language here. Right away, when she writes precision-tooled, it works as a metaphor that suggests that there is a manufactured construction. When she says that it flatters the bias of the sappiest white liberals, we see a hint of sarcasm. It's provocative, it's inflammatory, it deliberately challenges the reader. Jason Ardy has found himself under scrutiny in the run to the publication of this book. Under scrutiny establishes controversy before the review develops its argument. So the tone is skeptical, provocative, and dismissive. And it was written on August 6, 2026, so it's a topical event. It's a very recent issue. Now let's start the review. She says, Jason Ardy is a truly incredible man. In 2023, aged 37, he became the youngest Black professor to have been appointed for the University of Cambridge. We look at positive diction. Initially, when she starts speaking like this, the reader accepts that he had an extraordinary life. Later on, she's going to dismantle that. Remarkable in itself, but Ardy was no prodigy. We look at a juxtaposition right away. That but disrupts the praise and signals that the writer is about to challenge this inspirational narrative. She says that his autism left him nonverbal and he was illiterate until he was 18. This is the dramatic contrast between Ardy's difficult childhood and his later achievements. We look at another juxtaposition here. A child born in poverty and disadvantage went on to complete his PhD. She further creates an extraordinary catalogue of his accomplishments. She says he's suffering from a brain tumor. So she creates this catalogue of his accomplishments, and he appears to be resilient and successful. Moving on, she says his athleticism instead turned into some incredible feats of endurance. We are looking at a superlative here. This intensifies his praise and makes him appear heroic and larger than life. Then we look at listing in logos. He ran 600 miles a day, 30 marathons in 30 days. And then she further talks about raising 5 million or 5.5 million in charity. All of these numbers add to logos. We look at an adverb. She says he's an incredibly charitable man. She says that his story has been put under new scrutiny. It has not borne the attention well. Now we look at a tonal shift here. Remember, all texts do not have a tonal shift. So if it is there, it is absolutely imperative to address it. Many of the well-published claims about his life have crumbled. Here, the metaphor suggests that claims are fragile and they cannot withstand investigation, making the reader question his reliability. Remember, metaphors add drama to your writing. When she says that he's on week-long retraction tour, it is again dismissive. Those 600 miles in 6 days, which would have made him one of the best ultra runners in the world, it's a rhetorical question. This shifts the reader from admiration to skepticism. Actually, he ran them over less than impressive 12 days. This contrast deconstructs the extraordinary image that has been created earlier. Moving further, she says the astonishing 5 million scholarship. These are all adjectives that evaluate the claims that he's making. She uses the word alas. Alas, non-disclosure agreements mean that he cannot identify other members. It adds sarcasm to your writing. When she says it's quietly erased, it suggests an attempt to conceal or remove inconvenient information. She goes on to saying, this is all embarrassing but arguably trivial. We are looking at a juxtaposition here again. More serious are the allegations that Ardy plagiarized parts of his PhD from another student's thesis. Now, these words have a very serious ethical connotations to it. Liverpool John Moores University, which awarded his doctorate, investigated and found no wrongdoing. Here she appears to give him some concession. She acknowledges the evidence that could defend him. It makes her criticism appear to be unbiased and more credible. Then she says another incredible thing about our race is bad luck. Misquoted, missupervised. Has any man ever been let down so badly by the media and the academia? We are looking at irony and sarcasm. The word incredible appears to praise him, but bad luck inverts that meaning. So the sarcastic tone makes the reader question whether he is genuinely a victim or he is responsible for his own difficulties. Here, you're looking at a rhetorical question which reflects the absurdity of his claim that everyone else is responsible for his problems. Furthermore, she says that this week R.D. resigned his position at Cambridge, presumably meaning that he is now the university's youngest Black ex professor. Here, she takes the prestigious title of the youngest Black professor and twists it into a humiliating description. Still, he seems to have some useful support from the establishment. When a journalist from the Times Higher Education Supplement, this adds ethos to what she says. Then she says, maybe I should turn myself to the nearest cop shop now because this review is not going to improve our race mood. You're looking at sarcasm and dark humor. This joke mocks the idea that the review itself might cause harm to him, creating a confrontational tone. Then she says, great and unfortunate things is mawkish, self aggrandizing, and hard to believe. We are looking at a circular structure. She has looped back to what she said at the start. When she says it all begins in the London council home, where young Arthur was brought up with his father, and she talks about his childhood. When she talks about the mother as the strong Black African woman, this is a direct quote from the book, by the way. Plagiarized or not, Audrey can't be accused of originality in his prose. She undermines the credibility of the literary quality of the autobiography and strengthens her dismissive tone towards the text. Remember, when you're looking at a review, you look at what is the tone, what are the words that the writer is using to either support or sort of dismiss the text. So, review can be positive or negative. Until here, we get an idea that it's a negative review. Furthermore, she says, as young Adi failed to hit his milestones, doctors declared him deficient and that he was no better than a vegetable. Audrey was, by his own account, a profoundly intellectually disabled child. He claims he could register sounds, but I couldn't shape them into meanings. Smearing his features on the wall was one of the few sensory releases. Now, when you read this, you're looking at sensory imagery. It's a very disturbing detail. It unsettles the reader. And it makes that childhood account very emotionally intense. She says, for most of us, it's hard to believe, maybe impossible to create memories before we have words. It's a challenge that Audrey acknowledges. Most of my memories of my early childhood are of generalized images, sounds, sensations, feelings, rather than specific events. We are looking at a juxtaposition here. Generalized versus specific memories. Then she says, and yet Audrey has astonishing, sometimes verbatim recall from his earlier years. This undermines the credibility of the autobiography. There is an internal contradiction. Then she writes in parentheses, you go strong, girl. It is a mocking, humorous tone again. Furthermore, when you look at the word presumably after he grew out of playing with his own waist, we are looking at a bias. It shows that the writer is not an objective reviewer. She's actively looking for ways to undermine his narrative. She writes this paragraph, he remembers his parents' sofa was bought on credit. He remembers that the artwork's plastered on the wall. You're looking at an anaphora here, a repetition. Now, this anaphora emphasizes the sheer amount of precise detail of his memories, and which makes the account seemingly unusual. She says it's all suspiciously specific. We are again looking at bias. When she says that one notable feature of the book is what it omits, it again speaks of selective construction of the autobiography, which means it's not reliable. Then she says that a lot of his incredible achievements are either not mentioned or included in a softened form. You're looking at euphemistic diction here. It suggests that the potentially damaging achievements have been concealed or minimized. So, the reader gets an idea that the autobiography could be managed or constructed in the way that the author wants it. She says there's surprisingly little detail on his experience, skepticism towards the omissions. Then she says the family was so poor, and she talks about a holiday. It's a contrast between the claim of poverty and traveling to South America. Then she says there are some new additions that are artery canon. The brain tumor, for example, treatment for which caused him to lose his memory just before the viva. Now, here the word canon is used as a metaphor. It refers to an accepted body of important work. So, using it sarcastically here suggests that his life story has become a collection of extraordinary legends. Then she says he's not a man to hold a grudge. In fact, he's such a liberal paragon that he's made a victim personal statement pleading for lenience. This reinforces her critical and mocking perspective. She says he compares himself at various points with Rocky, Forrest Gump, and God. All of these are allusions. This is intertextual comparison. It elevates his position from being a common man to a resilient hero. So he presents himself like this grand, self advertising hero. That is what he wants his audience to see him as. By promoting the medically unusual story of his own late childhood flourishing, Arte is creating false hope. Later on, she talks of a cause and effect relationship where she says that the parents would blame themselves. Now, here we look at Audrey's story and the emotional consequences it will have on families. By doing so, she encourages the readers to see the narrative as socially irresponsible. We see another anaphora, think of an early career, think of the students he taught, think of all the diligent, decent black academics who've been lumbered with the embarrassment. This anaphora builds a sense of accumulating consequences of his actions. She goes on to give him some concession and she says, not all victims are innocent. Cambridge and academia in general have earned their humiliation. Now, she pushes this critical perspective beyond Audrey to the institutions that enabled his prominence. She says that Audrey was promoted to huge prominence because he was a fashionable mascot. So you're presenting his identity as a symbolic figure. And furthermore, we look at the word huge. She's using colloquial language to be able to connect to more and more people. She says, nor do I have any sympathy for his publisher. Fact-checking works of non-fiction should be standard practice. We are looking at assertive diction here. This declarative statement presents her expectations as an obvious standard, positioning the publisher as clearly responsible for failing to meet it. So the criticism extends to the publisher as well. When you look at the use of label proofing, it suggests that the publishers are more concerned with protecting themselves legally rather than establishing the truth. And she ends by saying, Audrey still has defenders who claim that he's a victim of a racist stitch-up. In a post-truth world, audacity beats veracity every time. You're looking at an antithesis. You're looking at an aphorism, where the central criticism says that an appealing narrative can be more powerful rather than being factually correct. That is your book review. Now, how are you going to plan it? Once you do your annotations, you've established what is the verdict of the reviewer. You introduce the subject summaries and the extraordinary story. Then she undermines the story with factual inconsistencies. She examines the autobiography itself through memories, omissions, and construction. Then she moves from the criticism of the book to the criticism of its wider impact. She ends with a broader judgment about truth, publishing, and society. So, my guiding question here is, how and to what effect does the writer construct a critical perspective on the autobiography? Remember, the focus on the guiding question is imperative. Let's look at the response now. Start with the hook statement. Mention the text type, author, speaker, purpose, and have a nice thesis statement. You've got your introduction sorted. For example, stories of overcoming adversity can most certainly inspire. The text is an online book review published in the Times, in which the writer critically evaluates an autobiography and questions the credibility of the extraordinary life story presented within it. Addressing a general readership, the writer adopts a strongly skeptical and often sarcastic voice. aiming not only to encourage readers to question the reliability of the autobiography before deciding whether to read it or believe it, but also exposes the wider consequences of accepting an inspirational narrative without sufficient scrutiny. Through a provocative diction and irony, selective presentation of evidence, and a carefully constructed progression from admiration to skepticism, the writer constructs a critical perspective on the autobiography. I'm going to read out one body paragraph for you, and I will leave the link for the entire response for you to read on your own. Let's look at one topic sentence. As the review progresses, the writer uses sarcasm, humor, and provocative comparisons to undermine the heroic image constructed by the autobiography. She broadens her criticism to consider its wider social consequences. She describes the memoir as self-mythologizing, suggesting that the subject has transformed his experiences into larger-than-life legend. This is reinforced through the comparisons with Rocky, Forrest Gump, and even references to God. These are textual evidences that you put in inverted commas, and then you evaluate it. The brief interjection seriously creates an informal relationship with the reader, inviting them to share her disbelief, reader's effect. While the provocative phrase, poverty porn memoir, challenges the reader to question whether suffering is being packaged for emotional consumption. The humor, therefore, has a very serious purpose here. It strips away that heroic image while keeping the review engaging. You can find the complete response attached to the link. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much.